The town of Oakhaven was a place woven from the gentle threads of routine. It lay cradled in a soft folded valley, a patchwork of green fields and quiet streets where the most exciting event was the annual harvest fair. And at the very heart of it all, both geographically and spiritually, stood the Chapel of the Blessed Promise. It was a beautiful, humble structure built from local grey stone, its spire a modest finger pointing towards the heavens. The stained glass windows, depicting saints and shepherds, would catch the afternoon sun and paint the interior in a kaleidoscope of jewel-toned light. The pews were worn smooth by generations of the faithful. It smelled of old wood, beeswax, and a faint, lingering trace of incense, a scent that was, to the people of Oakhaven, the very aroma of peace. On the morning of Sunday, September 17th, the air was particularly clear. A late summer crispness had stolen in overnight. The bells of the Blessed Promise rang out as they always did, their bronze tones rolling across the valley. Families dressed in their Sunday best walked the familiar paths towards the church. Children scampered ahead, while parents exchanged pleasant greetings. Among them was Pastor John Miller, a man in his late 50s with kind eyes. He stood at the great oak doors, shaking hands, calling people by name. He saw the Henderson family with their twin girls. He saw old Arthur Wainwright, whose voice was still the strongest in the choir. He saw Mary Brennan, the town's librarian. He saw them all, a tapestry of his community. The service began at precisely 10:30 a.m. The sun streamed through the stained glass. The choir sang Amazing Grace. Pastor Miller stepped up to the pulpit. He spoke of faith, of the unseen things that bind the universe together. His words were gentle, reassuring. He remembers looking out at their faces. He saw old Arthur, his eyes closed in concentration. He saw little Lily Henderson fidgeting. He saw the dust motes dancing in the colored light. He remembers a profound sense of peace. He was mid-sentence, his mouth forming the word everlasting when it happened. There was no sound, no explosion, no roar. It was an absence of sound so profound it was itself a noise. The light did not flash or fade, it simply changed. The warm, jewel-toned glow was instantly replaced by a flat, neutral, overcast daylight. Pastor Miller blinked. The pulpit beneath his hands was gone. The scent of wood and wax was gone. He was standing alone, in the center of the town square, his hand outstretched to a non-existent congregation. The chill autumn air bit into his skin. Around him, where the solid grey stones of the chapel had stood, there was nothing but empty space. A perfect circle of neatly trimmed grass. For a moment, there was only the whisper of the wind. Then, a scream ripped through the silence. It came from Ilara Vance, the young waitress from the diner who had witnessed the impossible. The town of Oakhaven did not lose its church that day. It was amputated. Chaos began quietly. People who had been walking towards the church stopped in their tracks. They stared at the empty space, their minds stalled. A man dropped his newspaper. A woman whispered, "John." It was Pastor Miller's name. Her husband was inside. Then the quiet broke. The square filled with people running, shouting, "Where is it?" It was just there. "Sarah, my daughter is in there." Pastor Miller remained frozen at the epicenter of the void. Sheriff Ed Morgan found him, his face ashen. "John, what happened?" "What?" John Miller could only shake his head. They were there. They were all there. And then they weren't. The news spread like a deep, chilling frost. Phones rang. The streets filled with a slow, dazed procession of people moving towards the square. By noon, the square was cordoned off. State police arrived, then federal agents. They set up sensors, took soil samples, scanned the air. They interviewed everyone, especially Pastor Miller. Were there any unusual sounds? A hum? A vibration? Any strange lights? A flash? "Did you feel anything?" His answers were always the same. "No, nothing. It was just a transition." The days that followed were a blur of grief. The national media descended. Oakhaven was a national mystery, but for the families of the missing, there was only a gaping absence. 147 souls, all gone. The investigation hit a wall of nothingness. The soil was just soil. The air was just air. There was no radiation, no residue. The circle of grass was identical to the grass surrounding it. The only evidence was a paradox. Satellite imagery from 10:29 a.m. showed the church's shadow. The image from 10:31 a.m. showed nothing. The transition was instantaneous and total. A theory emerged from a consulted physicist: spontaneous, localized reality failure. He explained that the fundamental laws of physics might not be stable. A bubble of reality could simply pop. The matter within it would decohere, its information lost. It was a cosmic hard drive failure. For the people of Oakhaven, this was a soul-crushing obscenity. It meant their loved ones hadn't been taken. They had been erased, unmade, the town fractured. Some held candlelight vigils at the edge of the circle. They called it the empty tomb. Others fell into a deep nihilistic despair. The universe was random and hostile. Pastor John Miller was caught in the middle. His faith, once solid, now felt like sand. He had stood in that space and felt nothing. No divine presence, no malevolent force, just a silent, indifferent transition. He stopped shaving. He stopped leaving his house. The town looked to him for answers, and he had none. He replayed the last moments in his mind, a torturous loop. There was only the word everlasting hanging in the air. Weeks turned into a month. The media left. The federal agents withdrew. Oakhaven was left alone with its ghost. The vibrant community grew quiet. People avoided the square. The town was in a strange, unresolved mourning. It was on a cold, grey afternoon in late October, exactly 5 weeks after the event, that the second impossibility occurred. Ilara Vance was wiping down the diner's counter. She glanced out the window and dropped her rag. She didn't scream. She dialed the sheriff. "Ed," she whispered, "it's back." Sheriff Morgan was there in under a minute. The chapel of the Blessed Promise stood exactly as it had, whole. But something was wrong. The light was off. The windows were perfectly, utterly black. They were voids that seemed to absorb the light. The entire building exuded a sense of stillness, not peace, but the stillness of a vacuum. There was no sound. Sheriff Morgan radioed in. "It's back, but God, something's not right. Block the streets. Get Pastor Miller." The town now had to confront a presence, and this presence was far more terrifying. Pastor Miller arrived, staring at his church. A flicker of hope ignited, but as he looked at the lightless windows, that hope curdled into dread. This was not a return. This was a restitution. The feds returned. They sent a robotic probe up the path. The moment it touched the door, the probe vanished. The video feed cut to static. The lead agent, Dr. Aris, turned to Pastor Miller. "Pastor, is there anything different?" John Miller stared, and then he saw it. The weather vane. On top of the spire, the old rooster was gone. In its place was a perfect geometric spiral. And it wasn't moving. The wind was blowing, but the spiral was motionless. This small, wrong detail was a message, a signature. Days turned into a tense standoff. The building was quarantined. The people of Oakhaven were now prisoners. On the 7th night after its return, the church spoke. It was a pressure. A deep, subaudible hum felt in the bones. It vibrated through the ground, rattling cups. Everyone woke at the same moment. The hum lasted for exactly 1 minute, then stopped. The next morning, the scientists recorded a new phenomenon. The area of absolute silence around the church had grown. The void was expanding. Panic broke. There were shouts to destroy it. A group of armed men tried to rush the perimeter. Pastor Miller watched from his window. He saw the fear, the anger. He saw the black windows staring back. And he knew this was his burden. He had to face whatever was in the fold now. He would go as he had always gone, as a man of faith. He waited until the middle of the night. He dressed simply. He took nothing. He slipped out and moved through the shadows. The church stood in the moonlight, the black windows like holes in the night. He reached the edge of the silence. He stepped across and the world went mute. His footsteps made no sound. His breathing was silent. He walked up the path. He reached the steps. He looked at the doors. He reached out and pushed. The door swung open without a sound. The interior was lit by a faint, sourceless grey light. He stepped inside. The church was intact, but everything was wrong. The colours were gone. The world inside was monochrome, shades of grey. The vibrant windows were dull. It was a photograph of a church, and it was frozen. A layer of fine grey dust covered every surface, perfectly still. The air was thick. He walked down the centre aisle. He looked at the pews, and he saw them. His congregation. They were there. Every one of them. They sat in their exact positions. Old Arthur was mid-note. The Henderson family was frozen, Mrs. Henderson's hand on Lily's. Mary Brennan sat alone. But they were monochrome and frozen. Their skin was the colour of pale ash. They were photographs of people. Their eyes were open but held no life. They were simply present. Pastor Miller felt a silent scream building in his chest. This was worse than erasure. This was preservation. They had been captured, trapped in a single eternal moment. He walked towards the pulpit. He looked up. The space behind the pulpit was empty. There was no frozen version of himself, only his sermon notes open to the word everlasting. He had been spared. But why? Was he a witness, a messenger? He turned to face his frozen flock. This was not an act of God. This was an act of something that collected moments. The spiral was a symbol of a frozen, endless cycle. He knew they were not coming back. The church was a seed of absolute stillness, planted in the heart of a living world, and it was growing. He walked back, stepped out of the silence, and the world rushed back in. He walked towards the command post. Dr. Arris ran out. "What did you see?" John Miller stopped. He looked at her and then at the waking town. "It's not a tomb," he said. "It's a museum, and we are the next exhibit." He looked back at the church. The silence was inside him now. The event was not over. It had only just begun.